I am Gideon, 23 years old. Just hours before I was supposed to board a flight to California to finally start medical school, my older brother stood in our cramped, grease-stained kitchen and intentionally burned my full-ride scholarship papers to ashes. He actually held them directly over the open gas stove, watched the prestigious Stanford University letterhead catch fire, and laughed in my face. While my entire future was quite literally going up in flames right in front of my eyes, my own father simply looked at me, crossed his arms over his chest, and said, "Your place is washing our dishes, not sitting with doctors." They humiliated me in my own home, standing entirely united in their twisted belief that I was nothing more than a permanent, walking paycheck designed to fund their incredibly lazy lifestyles. They stood there, 3 against 1, mocking me and tearing down the only good thing that had ever happened to me. But there is one massive, life-ruining thing they did not know. The papers my brother so happily and viciously destroyed were just meaningless photocopies. Their little stunt wasn't the end of my dreams. It was the final nail in their own coffin. My lawyer already had the real, legally binding documents, along with a massive stack of federal and financial evidence that was about to rip our family wide open and expose every single one of their crimes. And right now, the very people who called me a street rat and told me I was worthless are facing absolute financial and legal ruin, begging and pleading for a second chance they will never, ever get from me. Before I tell you exactly how I meticulously dismantled my family's toxic, abusive empire overnight, please hit that like button if you truly believe in absolute justice and karma. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Now let's go back to that kitchen. Let's go back to the exact moment where this nightmare truly ended, and my real life finally began. The kitchen smelled horribly of burnt coffee, stale cooking oil, and now, the sharp, acrid scent of lighter fluid and burning paper. It was 11 o'clock at night on a Tuesday. The house was dead quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. I was just 7 hours away from walking out that front door and heading to the airport. I had my heavy canvas duffel bag completely packed and sitting by the front hallway. I had spent the last 5 years of my life working grueling, soul-crushing night shifts at Memorial General Hospital. I saved every single penny I could hide from them. I studied until my eyes physically bled. I did everything in my power to earn a ticket out of this suffocating house. And now Silas, my 26-year-old brother, was holding that very ticket over the blue flame of the gas burner. The fire caught the bottom left corner of the enrollment confirmation page. It curled upward violently, turning the crisp, expensive white paper into a brittle orange-lined ash that floated up toward the ceiling fan. I stood in the kitchen doorway perfectly still. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge at him. I didn't fall to my knees and beg him to stop. Silas tilted the paper expertly to let the fire climb faster, making sure the entire document was consumed. He looked at me with this wide, sick, deeply satisfied grin. It was the kind of smile a predator gives when they think they have successfully cornered their prey and there is no escape. "Street rats don't belong in classrooms," Silas mocked, his voice loud, echoing, and dripping with absolute venom. "Did you really think you were just going to pack up a little bag and leave us behind? Did you really think you were better than this family?" He casually dropped the burning remains into the stainless steel sink. The paper hissed aggressively against the damp metal, turning into a sad, gray sludge. Then, without missing a beat, he reached for the second document, the financial summary. This was the specific document that explicitly stated my tuition, room, and board were 100% covered by the university. He lit that one, too. He held it up like a trophy before dropping it to join the ashes of the first. I slowly shifted my gaze away from Silas and looked at my parents. My father, Vernon, was leaning comfortably against the refrigerator. This was a man who had been collecting a partial disability pension for a supposed bad back for a decade, yet somehow spent all his weekends perfectly capable of playing 18 holes of golf with his drinking buddies. He didn't even flinch as my scholarship burned. In fact, his chin was raised in arrogant defiance. "Your place is washing our dishes, not sitting with doctors," Vernon sneered, pointing a thick finger at me. "You think you're better than us? You think you can just walk away? That scholarship money should be coming into this house. It should be deposited into our accounts. Not going to some fancy college fund for an ungrateful kid who doesn't even know his proper place in the world. I had tried to explain it to them so many times over the last few months. The scholarship did not pay out in cash. I wasn't being handed a giant check. The funds went directly to the university's financial department to cover my education. There was absolutely no money to send back to them. But in their greedy, delusional eyes, me leaving meant my steady salary as a certified pharmacy technician would no longer be automatically deposited into the joint bank account that Vernon monitored like a hawk. To them, I wasn't a son with a future. I was a financial asset. I was a workhorse. And my departure was an unacceptable, unauthorized loss of their personal revenue stream. I looked over at my mother, Martha. She sat quietly at the kitchen table. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, resting on the worn tablecloth. She didn't say a single word. She didn't tell Silas to stop. She didn't tell Vernon he was being unreasonable. Her silence was the loudest, most painful betrayal of all. I have seen incredibly ugly divorce settlements that were far less hostile and toxic than the energy in this kitchen. She was perfectly fine watching her youngest son's future be burned to a crisp as long as it meant her bills would continue to be paid. Silas dramatically dusted the black ash off his fingers, clapping his hands together. "Go find yourself a bus ticket home when it all falls apart out there," he laughed, leaning against the counter. "Because your little Dr. Dream is circling the drain right now, Gideon. Right next to your stupid library card and your pathetic little scrubs. If you are a normal human being with a normal family, this is the part where you might completely lose your mind. You might physically attack him, you might break down crying, or you might beg for them to understand. I did absolutely none of those things. I simply looked at the gray, wet sludge in the sink. I looked at the three people who were supposed to love and protect me, and then I smiled. It wasn't a forced, crazy smile. It was a genuine, warm, deeply peaceful release. It is the exact kind of smile you get when you realize with absolute certainty that you no longer owe your abusers a single ounce of guilt, loyalty, or money. The invisible chains just snapped. I turned around without saying a word, walked down the hallway, picked up my heavy duffel bag, and walked out the front door. I didn't look back. I threw my bag into the back of my old sedan and started the engine. I drove to the airport in complete, beautiful silence. I didn't turn on the radio. The cool, crisp night air rushed through the open windows, clearing the smell of smoke from my lungs. The city streets were totally empty. The check-in at the airport was incredibly smooth, and the TSA security line was a breeze. By 5:45 a.m., I was sitting peacefully at gate C14, sipping a black coffee and watching the brilliant orange sun rise over the airport tarmac. At exactly 6 a.m., the boarding announcement chimed over the intercom. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father's house number, the number I had known by heart since I was a child. It rang 4 times before Vernon finally picked up, his voice groggy, rough, and deeply irritated at being woken up. "I'm at the airport," I said, my voice dead calm, completely void of any emotion. "What? You little punk! Get back here right now," Vernon barked, the anger instantly flaring up in his chest. "We are not done talking about this." I leaned back in the uncomfortable molded plastic airport chair, watching the plane at my gate. "Before I board this plane, Dad, I need you to walk into the kitchen. I need you to open the thick manila folder I left on the kitchen table. Open it right now." There was a heavy, confused pause. I heard his heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. I heard the rustle of thick paper. And then the angry yelling stopped. The silence on the phone line became absolute, suffocating, and heavy. They thought the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen to them was me leaving their house. They were so incredibly, dangerously wrong. To truly understand the sheer, crushing weight of the documents inside that manila folder, and why they struck such absolute terror into my father's heart, you need to understand exactly what it took for me to earn that window seat at gate C14. I never, ever had a college fund waiting for me. We weren't necessarily living in extreme poverty, but poverty wasn't our main issue in that house. malicious entitlement was. Since the day I turned 18, I worked the graveyard shift at Memorial General Hospital. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week, every single week. I was a certified pharmacy technician. I processed highly complex medication orders. I performed sterile compounding for critical 4 drips. I verified dangerous dosage calculations for patients who were hanging on by a thread. And I strictly managed the hospital's controlled substance registry. It was a high-stakes, high-stress job. Precision wasn't just a requirement. It was literally a matter of life and death. I made a very decent salary for my age, but I rarely ever saw the fruits of my own labor. For 5 agonizing years, 60% of my net pay went directly into what my father, Vernon, aggressively labeled as household contributions. Rent, utilities, groceries, and a never-ending list of mysterious, undocumented administrative fees he completely made up on the spot. I was handing over nearly $2,000 every single month just to be allowed to sleep in the smallest, draftiest bedroom of a house I didn't even own. They treated my hard-earned salary like it was their rightful, early inheritance. Anytime I got a raise or a small promotion at the hospital, Vernon instantly increased my rent to absorb the extra money. It felt like a bitter custody battle over my paycheck every single payday. Meanwhile, Silas, the golden child, contributed absolutely nothing to the household. He dropped out of the local community college at 19 because he said the professors didn't respect his genius. Since then, he drifted from one minimum wage job to another, always getting fired, always loudly complaining that his bosses were out to get him or were jealous of him. He lived at home rent-free. He ate the expensive groceries I paid for. He ran up the electricity bill playing video games all night, and he spent his days bragging to anyone who would listen about some fake real estate opportunity he was totally going to launch next month. I survived my childhood and teenage years by hiding. My entire existence was spent at the Fairview Public Library. I would walk there straight from middle school and high school, and I would stay hidden in the aisles until the staff literally locked the doors at 7 p.m. I taught myself how to focus, how to study, and how to dream, because absolutely nobody at my home cared if I learned a damn thing. The head librarian, an older, wonderfully kind woman named Mrs. Higgins, was the closest thing I ever had to a real mother. She never once asked me why I stayed so late every single day, or why my clothes were sometimes too thin for the winter weather. She just made sure the desk lamp at my favorite corner table was always working. She would accidentally on purpose leave a fresh yellow legal pad and a good pen on my desk. She provided the quiet, safe haven where I eventually spent hundreds of hours studying for my MCAT, grinding through highlighted, secondhand biology books until I managed to score in the 97th percentile nationwide. My family absolutely hated my ambition. To them, trying to better yourself, trying to read a book, was a direct insult to the family dynamic. Silas was the one who viciously coined the nickname Street Rat when I was just 14 years old, loudly claiming I was always scurrying around the neighborhood because I knew I wasn't welcome in my own home. The nickname stuck instantly. By the time I was 16, it wasn't a casual joke anymore. It was my official derogatory title in that house. Vernon and Martha used it just as much as Silas did. I will never forget the day Silas took a can of jagged, bright red spray paint and wrote the words "Street Rat" across the rear fender of my only mode of transportation, my bicycle. I had to ride that vandalized bike to the library every single afternoon for 3 agonizing months because I couldn't afford to buy a new fender, and the cheap paint wouldn't wash off no matter how hard I scrubbed it with soap. I constantly lied to myself, pretending it didn't bother me. But every single time a car drove past me on the street, I felt the deep, burning humiliation tight in my chest. It was my Uncle Harrison who finally stepped in and saved me from that specific misery. Harrison is my mother's older brother, a quiet, hard-working guy who runs his own independent carpentry and HVAC business. He saw my ruined bike parked outside the local grocery store one afternoon. He didn't make a big, dramatic scene. He didn't call my mother to scream at her. He just quietly drove his truck over, loaded my bike into the back, drove me to his dusty woodshop, handed me a fresh can of black Rust-Oleum spray paint, and stood there guarding me while I painted over the red letters. Before I left his shop that day, He went to his office and handed me a heavy, worn-out Campbell biology textbook he had found at a weekend garage sale. Inside the front cover, he had written in thick, black ink, "You are going to need this more than they think." That heavy book became my absolute Bible. Uncle Harrison was the only person in my entire bloodline who looked at me and actually saw a future doctor, not a human ATM meant to fund their laziness. I kept my head down for years, paid their ridiculous extortion fees, and focused entirely on my exit strategy. I genuinely thought if I just endured the financial and emotional abuse a little longer, I would eventually get out clean. But exactly 3 weeks before my flight to California, the delicate illusion of a peaceful exit completely shattered. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I had just come off a brutal, exhausting night shift. My hands still smelled strongly of isopropyl alcohol and rubber nitrile gloves. The house was dead quiet. Silas was asleep in his room, and my parents were out running errands. I walked out to the mailbox to grab the standard utility bill, but sitting right on top of the junk mail was a thick, pristine white commercial envelope bearing the official, intimidating seal of the State Board of Pharmacy. My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. As a registered CPHT, receiving unsolicited certified mail from the State Board is rarely, if ever, a good thing. I took the envelope straight to the kitchen table, ripped it open with shaking hands, and started reading. The letter was a formal, aggressive notice of a drug diversion audit. It explicitly stated that highly unusual, bulk ordering activity had been heavily flagged under my specific professional license number. According to the board's investigators, a secondary wholesale pharmaceutical distributor account had been opened exactly 14 months prior, using my full legal name, my CPHT credential, and my exact state license number. This fraudulent account was officially registered to a P.O. box in Henley County, a small, rundown town about 30 miles north of our city. Over the past year, this phantom account had been consistently ordering massive quantities of hydrocodone and tramadol, highly restricted, highly addictive controlled substances. The order quantities were expertly, meticulously staggered. They were sitting just barely below the legal volume threshold that would normally trigger an immediate automatic DEA raid. The board was aggressively demanding a formal written response and a full, itemized ledger accounting within 30 days, openly threatening federal prosecution, massive fines, and the permanent revocation of my license if I failed to comply. I felt the blood completely drain from my face. I knew exactly what a drug diversion alert looked like. I had helped the hospital administration process multiple audits over the years. This wasn't a simple clerical error. This wasn't a typo. This was a highly calculated, deliberate black market operation. Someone had intentionally stolen my professional identity to run a felony pharmaceutical ring. If I went down for this, my Stanford scholarship was instantly gone. My entire medical career was dead before it even started. I would be looking at years in federal prison. I didn't panic. My emergency hospital training immediately kicked in. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight out to the Henley County Post Office. It was a dusty, single-story brick building sitting right next to a massive Walmart. I walked confidently up to the counter, flashed my official hospital badge and the terrifying board letter to the clerk, an older woman named Clara. I looked her dead in the eye and told her I was conducting a preliminary fraud investigation regarding stolen medical supplies. Clara adjusted her glasses and looked at the P.O. box number I gave her. She slowly typed it into her ancient, clunky computer system. "I really can't give you full account details without a police warrant, honey," Clara said, loudly chewing her gum. "But I can confirm the primary registered name on the box for you. It's registered to a Silas Miller. He comes in here about twice a month to pick up heavy, unmarked packages from a distributor guy named Gareth. Silas, my older brother, my lazy, video game playing, perpetually unemployed brother was successfully running a felony drug ring using my hard-earned medical credentials. He had literally snuck into my room, stolen the laminated certification card right out of my wallet while I was sleeping, copied the state numbers, and set up a black market wholesale portal to sell pills. I walked out of that post office and drove back home, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned stark, painful white. When I finally walked through our front door, Silas was sprawled comfortably on the living room couch, aggressively mashing buttons on his Xbox controller, completely without a care in the world. "Hey, street rat," he mumbled, not even bothering to look away from the television screen. "Grab me a cold soda from the fridge, will you? I'm busy." I stood there and stared at the back of his head. It would have been so incredibly easy to grab him by the collar of his shirt, drag him into the kitchen, and beat him until he confessed to everything. But raw rage is a sloppy, dangerous weapon. If I confronted him right now, he would instantly destroy the digital evidence, close the P.O. box, alert his buyer Gareth, and deny absolutely everything. It would just be my word against his, and the state board would ultimately hold me legally accountable because it was my name on the license. I walked right past him in absolute silence. I went straight to my bedroom, locked the door tight, and opened my laptop. The gloves were off. It was time to hunt. But I honestly thought Silas's drug ring was the absolute worst betrayal I would uncover in this house. I was so incredibly, devastatingly wrong. Once you finally realize that your own flesh and blood, your own brother, is fully willing to send you to federal prison just to make a quick buck, the blinders come off completely. You stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. I spent the next 4 days functioning on zero sleep, running deep, obsessive background checks on my own life. I pulled every public record, every deep credit report, and every financial statement I could legally access from my computer. Exactly 2 weeks before my flight, I logged into a major, secure credit bureau portal to double-check my score. I had always been incredibly meticulous about my financial health. I paid for everything in cash. I never carried a rolling balance on my single, low-limit credit card, and I had proudly maintained a flawless 760 credit score. The screen slowly loaded. The large number flashing back at me in bold font was 510. My stomach plummeted straight into the floor. I felt physically sick. I frantically scrolled down to the active accounts section of the report, and my eyes locked onto a massive, glaring red flag. Exactly 18 months ago, a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, had been opened for the absolutely staggering amount of $95,000. It was legally tied to the deed of 114 Maple Drive, my parents' house. The primary borrower listed on the loan was Vernon Miller. The co-borrower, who was legally responsible for the entire massive debt if the primary defaulted, was Gideon Miller. Couldn't breathe. The air felt thin. I printed the digital application right then and there and stared intensely at the signature line. There, sitting right next to my father's messy, scrawling handwriting, was my name. But it absolutely wasn't my signature. My G has a very specific, sharp, distinct upward hook at the bottom. This G on the paper was softly rounded, shaky, and hesitant. Someone had sat at a desk and physically, intentionally forged my name on a legally binding bank document to secure nearly $100,000. I dug deeper and looked at the bank's disbursement log. The entire $95,000 had been withdrawn in a single massive lump sum and paid directly to a local contractor for a massive residential garage conversion. Suddenly, every single confusing piece of the last 2 years snapped into a horrifying, crystal-clear focus. A year and a half ago, Silas had suddenly and loudly announced he was finally becoming an entrepreneur. He was opening a high-end auto detailing business right in our driveway. Professional contractors had swarmed our property for weeks, tearing down the old wooden shed and building a massive, climate-controlled, commercial-grade garage. It had hydraulic lifts, expensive air compressors, custom epoxy floors, and high-end LED lighting. Silas loudly bragged to all the neighbors that he had successfully secured angel investors who believed in his vision. In reality, his detailing business barely grossed $200 in a good month. It was nothing more than a glorified, ridiculously expensive hangout spot for him and his loser friends to drink beer. I looked even deeper into the loan terms. The mandatory monthly payment for that $95,000 debt was exactly $1,247. I pulled out my own personal bank statements and lined them up next to the loan documents. For the last 18 months, my father had suddenly increased my required household contributions by exactly $1,200, angrily claiming that property taxes, insurance, and utility rates had inexplicably skyrocketed in our area. I had been paying the mortgage on Silas's useless vanity project garage. My own father had committed a severe federal financial crime, forged my legal identity, destroyed my credit score, and then manipulated me into paying for the very chains that were drowning me in debt. I needed physical, undeniable proof. The very next morning, before my hospital shift, I drove straight to the local bank branch that had issued the fraudulent loan. I sat down in the aggressively air-conditioned office with the branch manager, a sharply dressed, overly polite guy named Preston. I played completely dumb. I smiled and told him I was helping organize my family's estate planning and desperately needed a physical copy of the original Helic origination documents for my personal records. Because my name was legally printed on the account as the co-borrower, Preston handed the thick file over without a single question. Holding the original document, staring at the bright blue ink of the forgery in my hands, was a surreal, out-of-body experience. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I left the bank, feeling numb, and stopped at a nearby gas station to get a coffee and process what I had just learned. While I was standing at the pump, smelling the sharp scent of gasoline, Toby, one of Silas's deadbeat, perpetually unemployed friends, pulled up to the pump right next to me. "Yo, Gideon," Toby yelled, leaning halfway out of the window of his beat-up Honda Civic. "Man, you gotta come hang out in the new shop this weekend. Silas was just telling us how your old man pulled nearly $100,000 out of the house equity just to set him up. Crazy support, right? Wish my dad loved me that much to drop $100,000 on my dreams." I forced a tight, fake smile, nodding slowly so he wouldn't suspect anything. "Yeah, Toby, it's crazy support all right. Really unbelievable." I drove home with the forged blue ink loan documents sitting on my passenger seat, practically burning a hole in the upholstery. I walked into the house, fully intending to kick my father's bedroom door open, throw the papers in his face, and aggressively demand an explanation. But as I angrily marched past the kitchen, I saw my mother's smartphone sitting on the counter, face up. The screen suddenly lit up brightly with an incoming text message from Vernon. My eyes instantly darted to the glowing screen. The message preview clearly read, "Vernon, did you move the blue bank folder? The one I signed for Gideon. I can't find it in the safe and I need to file the statement." I froze dead in my tracks. I watched closely as my mother, Martha, walked into the kitchen carrying a heavy plastic laundry basket. She didn't look at me. She didn't say hello. She just set the basket down, casually picked up her phone, read the text message, typed a quick, unbothered reply, and slid the phone deep into her apron pocket. Her face was completely, terrifyingly blank. She showed absolutely no surprise, no guilt, no confusion. She knew. My own mother sat at that kitchen table 18 months ago, watched my father practice forging my signature on scrap paper, and did absolutely nothing to stop him. She actively helped him cover it up. She watched me work exhausting 80-hour weeks at the hospital, watched me come home looking pale, exhausted, and completely hollow, and she greedily took my money to pay off a fraudulent bank loan that solely benefited her golden child. In that exact moment, whatever lingering shred of familial loyalty, whatever tiny ounce of love I still held on to, simply died. It evaporated. The heavy silence in that kitchen felt exactly like a funeral for the mother I thought I had. I didn't feel blind rage anymore. I didn't want to yell. I felt cold. Absolute, freezing, terrifying clarity. They weren't my family. They were a sophisticated criminal syndicate operating under my roof, and they were using my clean name as their personal shield. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a single word. I simply turned around, went straight to my bedroom, and carefully packed the Board of Pharmacy warning letter, the forged blue ink bank loan documents, the Henley County Post Office records, and my hospital time cards into a single, secure leather briefcase. I walked back out to the living room and calmly told them I was picking up an unexpected extra shift at the hospital. Instead, I drove straight downtown, parking outside a small, completely nondescript brick office building sitting right above a noisy dry cleaner. I walked up the creaky wooden stairs and sat across from Lawyer Caldwell. He was an older, incredibly sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet, catastrophic family fraud and high-stakes estate disputes. I didn't give him an emotional, tear-filled sob story. I didn't cry about my ruined childhood or the bike incident. I just unlatched my briefcase, slid the heavy stack of documents across his polished mahogany desk, and clinically walked him through the exact timeline of their crimes. Caldwell put on his thick reading glasses and meticulously scrutinized the paperwork. For 20 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the office was the low hum of the window air conditioner, the faint smell of dry cleaning chemicals seeping through the floorboards, and the steady turning of pages. When he finally looked up, his expression was incredibly grim. "Gideon," Caldwell said, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "What you have here are multiple, highly documented state and federal felonies. The drug diversion alone will immediately trigger a full DEA investigation. The forged HELIC application is wire fraud, bank fraud, and textbook identity theft. We need to walk into the police station right now. Your father is looking at a minimum of 5 to 7 years, and your brother could easily face a decade in a federal penitentiary." "No," I said instantly, without a second of hesitation. Caldwell frowned, looking at me with deep confusion. "You want to protect them? After they did all of this to you? Are you crazy?" "I don't care what happens to them," I replied, leaning forward, my voice cold and steady. "But my flight to Stanford leaves in exactly 7 days. If I drop this massive legal bomb right now, they will instantly panic. They will freeze our joint accounts. They will cancel my phone plan, trap me in endless police interviews and investigations, and do everything in their physical power to stop me from getting on that plane out of pure spite. I have worked 5 agonizing years to get into medical school. I am not letting a messy lawsuit, a police precinct, or my family's incredible stupidity delay my departure by a single hour." Caldwell leaned back slowly, steepling his fingers, clearly impressed. "So what's the exact play here?" "We move entirely in the shadows," I told him. "Draft the formal response to the State Pharmacy Board immediately. Give them Silas's exact P.O. box, his personal phone number, and the Henley County logs. Clear my medical license immediately, but officially request that the board delay contacting Silas for exactly 1 week. Draft a severe fraud affidavit for the bank regarding the $95,000 loan, but absolutely do not file it until the morning of my flight. Prepare the criminal police report for my father's forgery and my mother's complicity. Put it all in motion, prep the paperwork, but hold the detonator until I am securely at the airport, past TSA." Caldwell actually smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous, predatory smile. "You want to completely sever the financial and legal limbs of your family while you are at 30,000 feet in the air." "Exactly," I said. "I want to leave a thick manila folder right on their kitchen table. I want them to wake up, read it, and realize that the bank, the local police, and the federal DEA already know absolutely everything. I want them to know that I was the one who personally handed them over. And I want to be entirely, legally out of their reach when the horrific reality sets in." For the next 7 days, I lived entirely in the eye of the storm. I walked through the house like an invisible ghost. I watched Silas lounge lazily in his expensive, fraudulently funded garage, aggressively polishing a single car for 6 hours while loudly complaining about how tired and stressed he was as a business owner. I watched Vernon sit at the head of the dinner table, arrogantly boasting about how brilliantly he had managed the household finances and how lucky we all were to have him. I watched Martha mindlessly serve them food, completely ignoring my presence, treating me like the hired help. Every single time Vernon aggressively demanded his monthly $1,200 contribution, I simply nodded submissively and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it before I leave." What I was actually taking care of was quietly, efficiently rerouting my final hospital paychecks to a brand new, highly secure bank account at a completely different institution that they had absolutely no access to. I permanently closed my side of the joint account. I bought a prepaid burner phone and meticulously transferred all my essential contacts. I was systematically, ruthlessly erasing myself from their grid. The night before my flight, my heavy canvas duffel bag was fully packed. The manila folder containing exact copies of every single piece of damning evidence, along with a final, brutal cease and desist letter drafted by Caldwell, was tucked safely in my bedside drawer, ready to be deployed. I genuinely thought I was ready for a quiet, surgical exit. I thought I had perfectly anticipated every single move they could possibly make. But I grossly underestimated the sheer, vindictive, petty cruelty of Silas Miller. I didn't know he had been secretly digging through my bedroom desk while I was working my final shift at the hospital. I didn't know he had found the physical Stanford acceptance envelope I had kept for sentimental reasons. Which brings us right back to that stifling kitchen, to the nauseating smell of lighter fluid, to my older brother holding my dreams over an open flame, and my parents openly applauding the destruction of my future. They honestly thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken the street rat for good, trapping me there to pay their bills forever. But as I confidently walked out of that house into the cold night air, dragging my bag behind me, I knew the absolute truth. They hadn't burned my future. They had just happily lit the fuse on their own. The silence on the phone line was incredibly thick, heavy, and absolutely delicious. I sat there in the hard, uncomfortable plastic chair at gate C14, watching the busy baggage handlers in their neon vests load heavy suitcases onto the belly of the massive commercial jet. That plane was about to take me 3,000 miles away from the absolute worst people I had ever known in my entire life. I did not rush to fill the quiet void on the phone. I let the silence stretch and echo through the earpiece for a long, agonizing minute. I wanted my father, Vernon, to feel the exact, crushing physical weight of the heavy paper in his hands. I wanted him to slowly, painfully process the terrifying fact that the thick manila folder he had just aggressively ripped open on the kitchen table was not a heartfelt goodbye letter. It was not an emotional apology for leaving. It was a perfectly executed, meticulously planned legal and financial execution order for his entire abusive way of life. I could hear the faint, hollow background noises of the house I had personally paid to keep running for 5 agonizing years. The ancient, sputtering coffee maker dripping hot water onto the counter. The familiar, annoying squeak of the cheap linoleum floor under Vernon's heavy work boots as he shifted his weight. I could hear my mother, Martha, asking in a high-pitched, incredibly irritated voice what was going on and why I was calling so early in the morning, complaining that I was disrupting her sleep schedule. "I told you to open the folder, Dad," I said. My voice was completely flat, cold, and entirely devoid of any of the fear, anxiety, or subservience I had been forcefully trained to show him for my entire childhood. "What exactly are you looking at right now? Read the header on the very first page out loud. Read it so Mom can hear it." I heard the frantic, clumsy shuffling of heavy paper. Vernon's breathing changed drastically over the receiver. It went from the irritated, self-righteous huffing of an entitled patriarch to the short, shallow, panicked pulls of a man who suddenly realizes he just stepped on a hidden landmine and clearly heard the metallic click. This was a man who used to scream at me during Thanksgiving dinners, telling the entire extended family that I was a useless burden, treating my meager salary like it was his own personal 401k retirement plan. Now, he couldn't even form a complete sentence. "This is a mistake. This isn't what it looks like, Gideon," Vernon stammered, his voice trembling violently in a way I had never, ever heard before. I actually laughed out loud in the middle of the airport terminal. It wasn't a happy, joyous laugh. It was the dark, hollow, incredibly satisfying laugh of a man who finally holds absolutely all the cards in a rigged game. "It is exactly what it looks like, Vernon. Let's start with the very first document, shall we? If you look closely at the top left corner, you will see a formal, certified notification from the State Board of Pharmacy. Your golden boy, Silas, used my perfectly clean CPHT credential to open a secondary wholesale distributor account. He has been systematically ordering highly restricted, federal-level controlled substances, specifically hydrocodone and tramadol, for 14 consecutive months. The account is legally registered to his personal P.O. box in Henley County, right next to the Walmart where Mom shops. And it is tied directly to his personal cell phone number. The exact same phone number he uses to text me to bring him fast food when he is too lazy to drive. I heard Silas's voice in the background now. He had clearly walked into the kitchen, drawn out of his bedroom by the sheer, undisguised panic in my father's voice. "What the hell is he talking about?" Silas demanded, his tone sharp, defensive, and immediately aggressive. I spoke loud enough for the phone's microphone to pick it up clearly, making sure my voice carried through the speaker to wherever my older brother was standing. "I am talking about the felony drug ring you have been running under my medical license, Silas." The formal DEA referral was officially filed yesterday afternoon by my lawyer. The state board already has the entire unredacted audit trail, including the delivery logs from your shady buyer, Gareth. You aren't an entrepreneur. You aren't a brilliant businessman building a real estate empire. You are a federal drug trafficker, and the feds have every single piece of data they need to put you away for a very long time. "That isn't mine," Silas yelled. I could hear the absolute, gut-wrenching terror bleeding into his voice. The speed of his denial was way too fast. It was the panicked, uncoordinated defense of a perpetual coward who always expected his younger brother to take the fall for his massive mistakes. "He's lying, Dad. It's a fake. It's a complete fabrication. He's just trying to screw us over with a fake lawsuit because he's mad about the papers last night." My lawyer has the Henley County Postmaster on official recorded statement, I continued, completely talking over Silas's pathetic, whining lies. "There is absolutely nothing left to deny. The federal investigation is already active. But let's move on to the second document in the folder, Dad. I want you to flip the page. Go ahead. Tell Mom what it is. Tell her what you did." More rustling of paper. I heard Martha gasp. It was a sharp, genuine intake of breath that echoed loudly through the phone. "That is a $95,000 home equity line of credit application," I said, checking my watch. The boarding call for group just echoed through the busy terminal. "You will notice that my signature on the co-borrower line is heavily circled in bright red ink. That is because it is a blatant, undeniable forgery. You physically forged my legal signature on a binding financial bank document to pull nearly $100,000 out of the house equity. You did it just to build Silas a luxury garage that grosses maybe $200 a month. That mandatory monthly loan payment of $1,247? The one you quietly and maliciously buried in my household contributions for the last 18 months while lying straight to my face? That payment is entirely yours now. Every single penny of it." "Gideon, you listen to me right now," Vernon snarled, trying desperately to regain his footing, trying to summon the old, booming, terrifying voice that used to make me shrink into the walls as a child. "We are your family. You do not do this to your family. We can work this out. We will sit down like adults. We will restructure the loan. We will fix this mess. Come back from the airport right now. Do not get on that plane." "You want to talk about family?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that cut through the phone line like shattered glass. "Last night, you stood in that kitchen and happily watched your golden child burn my Stanford Medical School scholarship to ashes. You told me my only place in this world was washing your dirty dishes. You called me a street rat. You treated me like a broken ATM for 5 grueling years, completely draining my salary while you sat on the couch collecting a fraudulent disability pension. You forged my name. You destroyed my credit. You let Silas risk my freedom and my medical license. You aren't my family. You are a financial parasite." I paused for a few seconds, letting the cold, hard reality wash over them. "And by the way, Dad, the papers Silas burned last night, they were cheap, meaningless photocopies. I submitted all my official enrollment documents, financial summaries, and housing confirmations to the Stanford digital portal exactly 6 weeks ago. My enrollment was securely locked in before Silas ever struck the match." I heard Silas groan loudly in the background. It was a visceral, guttural sound of total, crushing defeat. The laughing, arrogant bully from 8 hours ago was completely dead, replaced by a terrified, cornered criminal realizing he was about to face federal investigators without a human shield to protect him. "Gideon, please." Martha finally spoke up, Her voice was trembling, high-pitched, and laced with genuine tears of panic. "This isn't fair. You can't just leave us with all of this debt. We took care of you. We put a roof over your head. We were going to start a college fund for you eventually. I'm your mother. You sat at that table and watched him practice forging my signature." "Mom," I said coldly, offering zero comfort. "I saw the text messages on your phone. You knew all about the massive loan. You watched me work 80-hour night shifts at the hospital, looking like a walking corpse, and you gladly took my money to pay for your husband's felony. You are a direct accessory to bank fraud and wire fraud. My lawyer has already included your complicity in the formal police report. Whether the county district attorney decides to press criminal charges against you is completely out of my hands now." "You are killing us," Silas screamed in the background, completely losing his mind. "Just call the lawyer and cancel it. Cancel the DEA thing. I'll close the P.O. box today. I swear to God. Give us a chance to fix this." "You cannot cancel a federal investigation, Silas," I said, picking up my heavy duffel bag and standing in line for Group B. The gate agent smiled warmly at me, scanning my boarding pass. The golden boy is finally going to have to explain his brilliant business model to a federal agent. And the street rat is going to medical school. "Gideon, wait," Vernon started, his voice cracking, shedding every single ounce of pride he had left. "My bank accounts are permanently closed. The money stops today. Do not ever call this number again," I said. I hit end. I didn't even bother to block the number. I simply powered the phone completely off, pulled the plastic SIM card out, snapped it in half, and dropped it into a heavy metal airport trash can. I walked down the jet bridge, stepped onto the plane, and took my window seat. I watched the city shrink away beneath the clouds. For the first time in 23 years, I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong about the sheer scale of the fallout that was about to hit them. I slept for almost 5 solid hours on that flight to California. It was the deepest, most peaceful, most restorative sleep I had experienced since I was a young boy. There were no harsh alarms to set, no stressful hospital night shifts looming over me, and absolutely no dread of walking through the front door of 114 Maple Drive to see what new, catastrophic financial crisis my father had invented. While I was sleeping somewhere high over the Midwest, the absolute, devastating reality of my departure was detonating back in my hometown like a perfectly timed explosive. I didn't see the immediate fallout myself, but I didn't have to. Before I boarded the plane, I had made one final, crucial phone call. I called Uncle Harrison. I told him exactly what was in that manila folder, what my lawyer Caldwell was actively doing, and that I was safe on a plane heading out west. I asked him to drive over to the house a few hours later, just to make sure nobody did anything physically drastic, and to act as a completely neutral, unaffiliated witness to the aftermath. Uncle Harrison sent me a long, incredibly detailed, multi-page email exactly 3 days later, describing the exact chaotic scene he walked into. Harrison arrived at the house around 9:30 a.m. He said he drove through the neighborhood, passing all the perfectly manicured lawns managed by the strict HOA, and pulled into the driveway. He parked right next to the massive, fraudulently funded garage. He said the front door of the house was completely unlocked, swinging slightly in the crisp morning breeze, so he just walked right in. The house was dead quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful, relaxing quiet. It was the heavy, suffocating, terrifying silence of a fresh crime scene. He walked down the hallway and found Vernon sitting in the exact same wooden kitchen chair he had been occupying during our phone call. The thick manila folder was splayed wide open on the kitchen table. The documents were spread out across the surface like a morbid, undeniable autopsy report. The fraudulent bank loan application, the terrifying DEA notice, the forged signature clearly highlighted in red ink by my lawyer, the itemized, undeniable ledger showing exactly how Vernon had illegally routed my hard-earned salary to cover the Hellick payments. Harrison said Vernon wasn't even reading the papers anymore. Both of his large hands were pressed flat on the table, and he was just staring blankly at a fixed point on the wall, completely paralyzed by shock. His coffee cup had a thick, brown condensation ring around the base where it had been sitting untouched for hours. He looked exactly like a man who had been hit by a massive freight train and was still trying to figure out if his lungs were working. The absolute arrogance, the booming patriarchal authority that he used to terrorize me and control the household, was entirely gone. He was just a tired, broken, foolish old man who suddenly realized that he couldn't bully, scream, or manipulate his way out of a federal real estate and bank fraud lawsuit. Martha was standing completely frozen by the kitchen sink. The exact same sink where Silas had triumphantly dumped the ashes of my fake Stanford scholarship papers. The ashes had dried into a pathetic, sticky, gray film coating the stainless steel. Harrison said she wasn't crying hysterically or screaming. Instead, she was hyperventilating, gripping the cold edge of the counter so hard her knuckles were stark, bone white. She looked completely lost, like a woman standing in a room she no longer recognized. She had spent her entire adult life playing the quiet, passive victim, constantly enabling her husband's cruelty and her eldest son's extreme laziness, all while happily feasting on my hospital paycheck. Now, the ATM was permanently gone, and the police were coming to take custody of her husband. Silas wasn't in the kitchen. Harrison walked out the back door and found him in the massive $95,000 luxury garage. The bright overhead industrial LED lights, the ones I had unknowingly paid for with my sweat and tears, were switched completely off. The giant air compressor was dead silent. Silas was sitting directly on the cold, oil-stained concrete floor, his back pressed hard against his expensive metal workbench, his legs stretched out in front of him. He was holding his cell phone in his hands, staring blankly at a black screen. He didn't even look up when Harrison walked in. The golden child, the self-proclaimed brilliant entrepreneur who truly thought he was untouchable, was sitting in the dark, waiting in absolute terror for the DEA to kick his door down. Harrison didn't yell at them. He didn't offer a long, emotional lecture. He just walked back into the kitchen, pulled out a chair, and sat directly across from Vernon. You people burned his medical school scholarship letter and told him his only purpose in life was to wash your dirty dishes, Harrison said, his voice incredibly low, steady, and devoid of any sympathy. Then you completely turned a blind eye and let your oldest son use his clean pharmacy license to deal dangerous narcotics. And you forged his signature to pull nearly $100,000 in debt to build a useless garage that doesn't even make enough money to keep the lights on. What exactly did you think was going to happen, Vernon? Did you honestly think he was just going to be your obedient slave forever? Did you think you could just steal his entire life as your personal inheritance? Vernon didn't look up. He didn't defend himself. He didn't try to justify it. He just kept staring at the wall, breathing heavily. Later that same afternoon, the sheer desperation fully set in. Martha actually had the utter audacity to call Uncle Harrison's phone, sobbing loudly, begging him to intervene on their behalf. "Harrison, you have to call Gideon," Martha pleaded, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. "He changed his phone number. He blocked our emails. You have to tell him to come home right now. He filed some kind of insane police report against Silas, and he's telling the bank Vernon forged something. He has completely lost his mind. He abandoned this family during the worst moment of our lives. Tell him to at least keep sending his salary payments until we get this whole massive misunderstanding sorted out." It is truly staggering how the manipulative, narcissistic mind works. Even while staring directly down the barrel of federal prison and absolute bankruptcy, her primary concern was that her direct deposit had been abruptly cut off. "Which part exactly would you like him to help you sort out, Martha?" Harrison asked coldly. "The part where Silas used his brother's clean pharmacy license to run a massive, illegal pill mill? Or the part where your husband forged Gideon's legal name on a binding $95,000 bank loan? Which specific felony do you want the kid to come back and pay for?" "That isn't what happened," Martha shrieked, fully committing to the delusion, desperate to protect her false reality. "Gideon is twisting things. He works in a hospital. He knows how to manipulate these systems. He is my son, and he left without even saying goodbye. I am his mother. I should have custody of his loyalty. He is your son, And you sat there in silence and let his brother burn his future on a stove. Harrison replied, his voice hardening into steel. I have the exact same folder Gideon left on your table, Martha. He sent me digital copies of every single page before he even called you from the airport. I read the loan application. I saw the text messages you sent Vernon about hiding the folder from the safe. He didn't twist a damn thing. The paperwork speaks for itself. I have absolutely nothing left to say to you that could possibly make this reality any smaller than it is. Martha hung up the phone abruptly. 10 seconds later, Harrison sent her a single text message. It was a high-resolution scanned image of the HELIC application. Vernon's primary signature was on the top line, and the blatantly forged co-borrower signature was heavily circled in thick red ink. No commentary, no follow-up text, just the undeniable, physical proof of their crime. She didn't reply. There was absolutely nowhere left for them to hide. The trap I had carefully laid with lawyer Caldwell was springing shut flawlessly, and the mechanical, unforgiving gears of justice do not care about your family drama. They only care about the paper trail, and I had given them a multi-lane highway leading straight to a guilty verdict. But the real destruction was only just beginning. If you have ever been the victim of deep, systemic narcissistic abuse, you know that the absolute hardest part is watching the abusers get away with it for years while brilliantly playing the innocent victim to the outside world. They twist the narrative. They make you look crazy. But when the house of cards finally collapses under the weight of hard, undeniable legal evidence, it doesn't just fall. It vaporizes. And the fallout for the Miller family was swift, incredibly brutal, and completely public. The DA referral moved through the federal justice system in less than 3 weeks. Federal investigators immediately contacted the wholesale pharmaceutical distributor, completely confirmed the unauthorized account, and traced the massive, illegal orders directly to Silas's P.O. box in Henley County. But they didn't just stop there. Because Silas was incredibly sloppy, they traced the secondary shipping addresses to Silas's actual day job. At the time, Silas was working at a local auto parts warehouse, barely holding onto the minimum wage job. On a random Wednesday afternoon, right during the busy lunch rush, a regional compliance officer and 2 armed local police officers walked right through the front glass doors. Silas was called into the employee break room over the loud public address system. His shift manager, a strict man named Nolan, stood by the door with his arms crossed, completely humiliated, in front of a dozen co-workers who were eating their sandwiches and staring in absolute shock. Silas was forcefully questioned. He was then escorted to his locker. He was forced to empty the contents of his locker into a cheap cardboard box while the police watched his every single move. Manager Nolan physically revoked Silas's key card right at the exit doors. Nobody told him to have a good day. When a curious coworker asked what happened, Nolan simply stated that he was legally not permitted to discuss severe federal personnel matters. By Thursday morning, the entire town knew Silas Miller was under a massive narcotics investigation. He was completely unemployable. But Silas's devastating public humiliation was absolutely nothing compared to the absolute financial apocalypse that hit my father, Vernon. The bank, upon receiving Caldwell's heavily documented fraud affidavit and the official police report number, immediately froze the entire HELIC account. They officially called in the $95,000 loan. Because the loan was originated under highly fraudulent terms, the standard 30-year repayment schedule was entirely voided. Vernon received a terrifying, certified demand letter via a private courier requiring the full, outstanding balance to be paid in exactly 90 days, or the bank would immediately begin foreclosure proceedings on the real estate. 2 weeks later, a second certified letter arrived. This one was far worse. It was from the county district attorney's office. They were officially requesting an in-person interview regarding the severe forgery of the co-borrower signature. Vernon completely panicked. He scrambled and hired a desperate, overpriced criminal defense attorney to keep him out of jail. The initial retainer alone was $4,500. Let's do the brutal math. The exact same cruel math Vernon used to weaponize against me to keep me trapped in that house. Vernon's partial disability pension covered roughly $2,100 a month. The fraudulent loan payment he was now solely responsible for was $1,247. The remaining basic household expenses, the utilities, the property taxes, the groceries that I used to cover entirely, amounted to $1,920. Furthermore, the massive legal fees were quickly draining whatever tiny savings they had hidden away. The math simply does not work. It is physically, mathematically impossible. Vernon literally sat at the kitchen table with a cheap plastic calculator and produced the exact same impossible negative number 4 times before violently sweeping the calculator off the table in a fit of rage. Without my steady $2,000 a month, they were drowning in a matter of weeks. The house they loved so much, the house they used to trap me and control me, was heavily leveraged and marching steadily, inevitably toward complete foreclosure. They were about to lose absolutely everything. It was a financial divorce from reality. And then there was Martha, the quiet, insidious enabler. Martha worked 20 hours a week as a cashier at the largest grocery store in town. It was a highly social job. She loved chatting with the locals, projecting the perfect image of a normal, hardworking, dedicated mother. She thrived on the positive attention. But dark secrets absolutely do not stay secret in a town like ours, especially when police officers show up at auto parts stores and angry bank managers start gossiping at the local country club. A regular customer explicitly brought up the Miller family situation and the looming lawsuit while standing right in Martha's checkout line, speaking loud enough for the next 3 people to hear. Mrs. Henderson, the strict store manager, immediately pulled Martha into the back office. Martha wasn't technically fired. They didn't have solid legal grounds for that yet. But she was instantly and humiliatingly transferred from the highly visible main cash register to the isolated, dusty stockroom in the back of the building. Same hours, same minimum pay, but the customers who used to greet her warmly by name now got their change from someone else. She was essentially hidden away like a shameful secret. The social exile extended everywhere they went. At their local church, the tight-knit community that used to smile, hug them, and shake their hands suddenly turned ice cold. It was like attending their own social funeral. The family that routinely sat directly behind the Millers for a decade quietly moved 3 pews up without saying a single word. Martha still stubbornly attends service every Sunday, sitting in the exact same spot, desperately trying to pretend everything is completely normal. But the space behind her, and the space beside her, always stays completely, deafeningly empty. As for the golden boy, Silas spends his days sitting on the cold concrete floor of his precious garage shop. The exact garage that cost a forged signature, a massive 6-figure loan, and a completely destroyed family. The expensive detailing polisher sits unplugged and covered in a thick layer of dust on the workbench. A half-finished customer car has been sitting abandoned on the hydraulic lift for 7 weeks because the owner heard about the DEA investigation and refused to bring his vehicle back to a known criminal. Silas doesn't even turn on the main overhead lights anymore because Vernon literally cannot afford the electricity bill. He leaves the heavy garage door cracked open just a few inches, just enough so the amber glow of the street lamp lights up the first few feet of concrete. Uncle Harrison drove by one night and saw him. Silas was just sitting there, back pressed against the wall, staring out at the empty spot in the driveway. The exact spot where I used to park my old, reliable sedan. The car that safely drove me to the hospital for 5 grueling years. The car that quietly took me to the airport at 4:30 in the morning while he slept. That car is never, ever coming back to Maple Drive. I thought I would feel guilty, but honestly, I only felt relief. It is currently raining heavily outside my window in California. It is the kind of torrential, unapologetic rain that washes the city streets completely clean and makes everything feel incredibly fresh and new. I am sitting at a sturdy wooden desk in a bright, shared apartment just a few miles from the Stanford University campus. My massive anatomy textbook is wide open to a highly complex section on the brachial plexus. On the wooden shelf directly above my desk, sitting proudly between a thick physiology manual and a small box of Earl Grey tea bags, is Uncle Harrison's old, battered Campbell biology book. The spine is heavily cracked. The faded pencil annotations from whatever anonymous college student owned it before me are still visible on the worn pages. And Uncle Harrison's handwritten note is still clearly written on the inside front cover in thick black ink. You are going to need this more than they think. Pinned securely to the corkboard right above my laptop is my CPHT certification card. My legal name, my hard-earned credential number, the official state seal shining in the warm desk light. It was the very first document that ever proved I was qualified for something in this demanding world. I earned that small laminated card at 18 years old, working the graveyard shift while my so-called family slept comfortably in the beds I paid for. I earned it while the hospital hummed around me, while I meticulously counted pills, compounded sterile IVs, and learned that deep precision is a type of fierce, quiet love that absolutely does not require anyone's validation or approval. Right next to the corkboard is my printed university schedule. Monday, 9 a.m., Gross Anatomy. It is my very first official medical school class. My legal, unblemished name is on the attendance roster. I have a guaranteed seat in a lecture hall full of brilliant, incredibly driven people who earned the exact same right to be there as I did. Silas didn't take that away from me with his lighter fluid. Vernon didn't steal it with his forged signature. Martha didn't quietly enable its destruction with her toxic silence. My phone is sitting face up on the desk. It has a brand new area code. It is a completely clean slate. It does not get incoming calls from Maple Drive. It does not ping with angry, manipulative text messages demanding that I transfer $1,200 to cover a fraudulent loan. It doesn't ring with toxic people telling me my only worth in life is washing their dirty dishes, or calling me a street rat, or laughing while they burn a piece of paper that holds my entire future. The contact list in this phone is incredibly short. It holds exactly 14 names. Some are my new study group partners. A few are brilliant professors who respect my work ethic, and a couple are genuine friends I've made at the local coffee shop. Absolutely none of them share my last name, except for Uncle Harrison. He calls me every Sunday evening just to ask how the weather is and if the classes are as hard as I expected. He never asks for money. He never demands anything from me. He never tries to guilt-trip me into talking to my parents. He just listens. My phone doesn't ring often, and honestly, I prefer it exactly that way. The silence in this apartment isn't a weapon used to punish me. It is pure, absolute peace. Setting boundaries with highly toxic family members is often treated by society like a messy, ongoing negotiation. People will constantly tell you to compromise, to go to family therapy with them, to be the bigger person because they are still your blood. But I am here to tell you that sometimes, blood is exactly what is actively poisoning you. You cannot negotiate with a parasite. You cannot reason with people who view your success as a direct threat to their comfort, and who view your paycheck as their personal property or an early inheritance. I didn't argue with them because arguments imply that their twisted perspective holds valid weight. I didn't scream or cry because screaming implies I desperately needed them to hear me and validate my pain. I simply gathered the undeniable legal evidence of their absolute malice, handed it over to the authorities who handle criminals, and I walked away to build the incredible life I actually deserved. I let the lawyers and the lawsuits do the talking for me. I let the federal government take custody of their freedom. If you take absolutely anything away from my story, let it be this: your loyalty should solely belong to the people who actively protect your future, not the ones who try to burn it just to keep themselves warm. You do not owe your abusers your success. You do not owe them your financial stability. You do not owe them your college fund, your promotion, or your hard-earned salary. And you certainly do not owe them a comfortable seat at the table you built with your own bare hands while they were busy trying to break your spirit. True healing starts when you realize that walking away isn't a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate. Sometimes, to finally spread your wings and fly, you have to be fully willing to let the people holding you down sink into the absolute ruin they created for themselves. Let them drown in their own karma. Let the bank take their real estate. Let them face the consequences of their own horrific actions. You just keep walking forward, head held high. I am Gideon Miller. I used to be a street rat. Today I am a medical student, and I am never going back. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line to protect your own future from the people who were supposed to love you? Share your story in the comments below. I know how isolating and terrifying it can feel to walk away, and I want this channel to be a safe place where we can validate each other's survival. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.